All right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Benjamin, and welcome back to another swing state analysis. And before I get into it, I want to talk a little bit about polling and some interesting data points that I've seen, um, as well as a little bit of math that I did, and why I think we need to take all polls with a grain of salt at the present, especially a lot of these swing state polls, because a lot of reputable pollsters have found that Trump is outperforming Biden in the swing states, whereas every most of the swing state polls that have been released individually by a lot of organizations show Biden ahead in each of these swing states individually. And CNN, CNBC, New York Times, and Siena and a few other pollsters have done just general broad polls of all the swing states, which most will define them as the states that were within 8% in 2016, is CNN and their polling company do, or within 10% or within 5%. But basically, whatever way you cut it, all of them find that Trump has an advantage in the swing states. And I pulled up the methodology and the crosstabs from the most recent one that CNN did, where they found Biden up nationally. I think it was like 46 to, up 51-46 in the national poll, but they found Trump up 52 to 45 in their swing state sample, which was oversampled to get more responses and therefore be more accurate. Now, that does not mean that they just lump that oversample into the general polls unweighted. No, they weighted every state according to how well represented they are in terms of voters and national figures overall. Except they weighted them towards population rather than whether or not they turn out to vote. Because if you look at what I've highlighted here, the entire sample was weighted to reflect national census figures for gender, race, age, education, religion of country, and telephone usage. Now, this may seem like a very good decision because you want the sample to be reflective of the population, right? Well, not necessarily. You want the poll to be, and the sample size to be reflective of turnout and who is going to vote. For example, Hispanics make up between 17 and 20% of the U.S. population. The official census data is like 17.5 ish. Yet, by my math, and if you look at most exit polls, they make up only 11% of the electorate. So you're going to be overweighting certain groups if you weight based off of census figures. Asian Americans, and Americans who identify as more than one race or as another race that isn't typically listed, for example, white, black, Hispanic, Asian, Pacific Islander, that sort of thing. They Both of those groups individually, they make up about 4 to 5% of the American population, and yet they make up 2% each of the electorate. So you go from 10% of the population all the way down to 4% of the electorate. So this is why I would say take all polls with a grain of salt right now. Obviously, they are a good place to start, and my election model does use basically every poll that pops up on the 538 latest polls page. And I try and update that every day, a couple of times a day, just to make sure it stays up to date. But this is why I haven't quite removed a lot of the fundamentals I include, is because if I don't keep those fundamentals in, it's going to show Biden running away with it, winning states that he is not going to win in November. In addition, I like having extra controls, and if that means my model's a little bit off, and if it means that there's a little bit of lag in responding to actual changes in the national polling environment, then so be it. I don't mind my model having a little bit of lag. It, I think it's actually a good thing because that means if things eventually revert back to mean, my model doesn't have too far to go to revert back. Whereas everybody is going to react in a dramatic way. Oh my God, Trump's going back. Whereas I'm going to say, yeah, that was just a small bump and it wasn't real support. Or if it was, it changed extremely quickly. But anyway, the other thing I decided to look at was Trump is polling 7% ahead of Biden in the swing states, and the average is probably closer to about 5 or 6. But let's just use this poll as a good example. So how much did he win it by? How much did he win the swing states by as an aggregate in 2016? Well, if we take the two-party share, which this is only asking about the two parties, and there's 3% undecided, but I'll go ahead and count that 3% because I didn't bother doing the third-party vote for all the swing states just because I wasn't really interested. Trump won the two-party share in the swing state 51.13 to 48.86. And that's pretty close. And if you throw in the third-party share, Trump probably falls to 50, probably into the low 50% range, is in the low 50% range, not like low 50s between, if that makes any sense. And Clinton probably falls down to about 48, maybe the upper 47% range. So Trump is dominating Biden in the swing states. If this poll and the other swing state polls are anything to go off of, at least if you take them as an aggregate. Which is why I have a hard time believing. I mean, I still include them, don't get me wrong, and I still factor those polls in. But polls like this, and especially similar polls released by other polling companies, they make me wonder what's going on with the pollsters who are finding that Biden is winning in Arizona and North Carolina and winning in Georgia. If Trump is winning in the swing states by 5 to 6% when he didn't do that in 2016. So the real question then becomes, which pollsters are wrong? And that's not a question that's a question we're not going to find out until election day. We're just not going to figure that out. But my thinking is that it's going to be the pollsters who are polling the individual states and not the aggregate. Because at the end of the day, everybody is still doing what I've highlighted here, which is weighting by the census data and not by a turnout model. Anyway, so we're going to move on and actually talk about what I intended to do. I just wanted to get that little bit out there. I know I spent 8 minutes talking about how to read polls, but it's important. And today we're going to talk a little bit about Maine. Now, this is a state that didn't really used to be a swing state, or let alone even have anything competitive in it. And then all of a sudden, the 2nd Congressional District becomes competitive, and Donald Trump picks it up, and he wins it by about 10%, similar to the percentage that Clinton won the 1st Congressional District by. The only difference was that the 2nd Congressional District had a lot more turnout, had more turnout the 1st had more turnout than the 2nd. And I don't think that sort of mentality, I don't think the districts are going to flip their votes, either of them. Certainly not the 1st, and I'm a little skeptical about the 2nd Congressional District voting for Biden. But I can see it happening, all things considered. And I definitely see this as a state that's going to remain competitive for years to come. And I think the cat is going crazy. But no, this is perfectly normal, and this is a good swing state. I wouldn't say it's a bellwether state, but it voted very similarly overall to how the nation did, except it had a higher third party turnout. I think Clinton won 35% of the vote, and Trump 35. I'm sorry. Clinton won. It was either 45 or 48%, and Trump won 43 or 45%. I don't remember exactly which one it was, but it was about a 3% gap between the two, and overall it did match the nation. So I wouldn't call it a bellwether state, but I would expect their vote to be fairly close to the nation as a whole, or at the very least fairly close to the swing states as a whole. If those polls that show the great disparity between swing state voters and the national environment are correct. And I am inclined to believe that the swing states are more favorable to Trump than the national environment is. But that's taking all the polling data into account. Obviously, I think the Democrats still have an advantage here when it comes to the at-large and certainly the first congressional district. But when it comes to the second congressional district, the GOP has definitely made up ground here and is likely to continue making up ground. But that's really about it for today. I want to say thank you, everybody, for watching. I hope you enjoyed. See y'all next time. Remember, likes, comments, subscriptions, they really do help. And if I make any mistakes, obviously, don't be afraid to comment. Just make sure it's an actual mistake and not just, you complaining about bias or whatever. Anyway, thank you. Have a nice day. Bye-bye.